Dear chess friends, this is one of the craziest chess games I have seen in my whole life. This is not some low elo legends or some guess to elo. This is from a classical time control game where Swedish international master Milton Panzer was playing with the white pieces, playing as against black Hans Niemann, one of the top junior players in the US and actually one of the top junior players under 20 in the whole world. And where to start with this game? Perhaps there'll be some, keyboard warrior in the comments, saying Panzer, but remember, Panzer, he beat Maxim Lagarde 2-6-3-4 GM earlier in his Vergani Cup Grandmaster tournament, so show some respect. Okay, let's see how this game played out. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, make sure that you smash that like button and certainly subscribe to the channel. It's the easiest way to improve your chess. So we're going for some perpetual check, like King D1, and Niemann says, you know what, I'm 200 points higher rate than this guy. I'm not going to play, Rook D1 and let his king run out like this. No, let's just take the pawn directly. Rook takes H2. And, well, yeah, it's not a big surprise, I think, to learn that the engine gives +4 for white. However, one point that's kind of interesting is that with this sort of imbalance of the knight and 2 pawns for the queen, well, normally you'd have a bishop in hand, and then you'd have, like, say, if you have a black bishop on G6, probably black is actually much better, because the pieces have stability, yes or yes, which is important when battling the queen. But with only one knight, I mean, how do you make this work? Let's see how Niemann does it. So we have queen b8. This is the move that white plays. Now, I think you should probably go for blood. You should go something like queen e8 instead, for example. Yeah, you go rook f2, but, like, so what? The king moves away. And while they're off gobbling our pawns, white is going to play for mate, like rook a8, queen h8, rook g8. But let's face it, you didn't come here for the stockfish deep analysis, but you came here for the just sheer story of, like, how the heck do you win when you're a queen down against an IM in a classical game? Well, that's what we're about to find out. So queen to b8 is played, trying to be solid. Like, I'm just going to consolidate my extra queen, let the position win itself, let that fruit ripen of its own accord. Niemann says, I'm the one who's collecting the harvest. And yeah, probably you want to put the king on g1, but he goes e1 instead. And after rook f3, it's a little tricky. They've got this here, we got this here. And again, it's like Niemann is just debating this dude. After rook f2, I mean, king d3, rook d2, that's checkmate already. So you can't just fall asleep at the wheel here as white. King to e1, rook to f3, offering a repetition. And this is where the psychology of the swindle comes in. It's not just about playing the first move of the engine every time and getting accused of cheating afterwards, but it's about getting in the opponent's mind, psyching them out, making them their own worst enemy, giving them just enough of a rope for them to hang themselves. Now, if you've been around, let's say, the Washington Square Park, you've seen those chess hustlers. They managed to win even when they're a queen down. Perhaps this is when Niemann was inspired to create this swindling masterpiece that will surely appear in the next edition of David Smurden's The Complete Chess Swindler. So let's see how the game went. Rook to a3, already a step in the wrong direction. You don't want to move the rooks backward. You want to move the rooks forward, man. Forward, 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 as I say. So black goes knight g3, so that's 3 pawns and a knight for the queen. It's still nowhere near enough. It's still +3 according to the computer, but watch what happens. Queen to b5, already the queen is going passive. Like, this is not the way to go. And Niemann says, I don't just want to hold a fortress, like, say, put the knight on e4 and sit and hold, like rook f5. I don't know if it's actually a fortress, but I mean, this is how most people would think, but not Hans Niemann. Niemann says, I'm going to start playing for a win, and with h5, he is introducing this idea of queening the pawn. How is white going to deal with it? White goes queen to d3. Computer says queen a6 for reasons that are completely beyond my understanding. And it's funny because I nearly choked on my own flame them, and, well, it's nothing compared to the choke that we're going to see with this game. King h6, the king is getting active, supporting that pawn. Now, if I'm white, I want to go something like rook a8 and try to give some check. But then king g5, and, the Bon Cloud king is coming back. Okay, it's not quite a Blanc Cloud, but same kind of spirit. In the endgame, the king is a fighting piece. It leads to charge like King Alexander of Macedon before it. But instead we have Rook A2. It's fine. It's a fine move. But then, instead of playing Knight E4, playing for the solid draw, we have Knight F5 going after this pawn. And the points after Rook E2, that rook is kind of passive. And look at this. We've got the Zerg rush coming. We've got G5, G4, H3, G3. Like, imagine if you got those pawns on that third rank, just 2 squares away from queening. To quote my past chess trainer Ian Rogers, that will beat everything up to a royal flush. So let's see what White's call is here. He goes queen to D2. He wants to set up an E4 to cover check. I'm not sure if this is the best move. I mean, Knight G3, for example, and Knight E4 would be one creative attempt where you're threatening the mate here. And maybe this was White's idea, yeah, to say, like, okay, I'm going to just, give up the queen like Knight E4 and takes, but saying that, White is up a rook and therefore it's just, going to be a win because these pawns say look nice, but they're not really moving that far and King can just stop them, right? So White should be winning in that position, I believe, but that's why Black goes G5. Very good practical decision. Don't let White eliminate the pieces and go for swaps to capitalize his material, but keep him, in the box. Keep him tied up. And still Knight G3 is in reserve, yeah? So White goes King D1. The King is trying to run, but look at this. H3. The pawn is just moving forward. The guy can't be stopped. And here, White has only one move that keeps a winning position, which White did not manage to find. Probably he was low on time. Probably he was starting to get in his own head. Like, how am I not just winning this position with a whole queen ahead? Like, what is going on? It's like there's some kind of witchcraft happening. So the move White has to find if he wants to win this is E4. You've got to change the position. You can't just be sitting here behind your castle walls, pretending that there's no danger. It's like, oh, it's just a scratch. But E4, you change the position. You've got Rook E4 coming. And a very cool point is Knight G3 is going to run in a Rook H4. And we use that pin. Let me show you on the board. Knight G3, Rook H4. And we're able to take that pawn. Very nice point. But you got to have that tactical genius to see it. And White just was not on his A game. And so he thought he could be sneaky with Rook F2. And his idea is that he's actually setting a little bit of a trap, right? Because if you play Rook takes E3, White has to move Rook takes F5. Bam. And we just win a piece, as you can see. And if you take with Knight, like say, oh, take a pawn check is always good. Not always. Because King E2, and you can see here that, White, even though he's giving up a pawn, he's managing to trade off the rooks. Yes or yes. And so after takes, like, the queen is able to, get around and outgun the knight. And it'll take time, but it's going to be a win. Unless, you drop dead in a winning position like Cecil Purdy did in a New South Wales Championship match against Peter Parr. Also, the story goes. But anyway, the game went Rook to G3. I mean, what a great move, Rook G3. We're still keeping in reserve the idea of taking that pawn on E3. But we've got some other threats as well up our sleeve. Like, after Knight 3, can even go Knight G4. Well, let me show, like, an example. Let's say, if instead of kind of blundering the way like White did in the game, like say you play a move like, I don't know, King C1. So that if Knight E3, you have Rook F7, you take the pawn. Black now just plays this very slow move, King G6. This is how the game could have gone. And you have Queen B4, suddenly... I mean, look at this. Black has 4 pawns and a knight for the queen. Like, that's, 7.5 roughly points of material. But the queen by itself is not that great an attacker, yeah? And, it's like get really crazy. Queen F8, G4, and at this point, these pawns are running so fast, I'm not even sure if Black is worse anymore. Absolutely unbelievable. You're ready to go, like, Rook E4 and take this pawn. You can also potentially bring the king in and try to queen this pawn. It's like the sort of position that, if we're talking the Australian chess players, it's like a Stephen Solomon style game. Like, get a losing endgame, find a way to outplay him and win it anyway because you're just a genius at the endgame. In any case, White instead thought that he could play a tricky move. He thought he could play Rook takes F5, but watch this. Rook to G1 check, very little intermediate check. He goes King E2. Obviously, Rook G2, Rook F2 is not on, so Black now takes the pawn, takes the rook, I should say, threatening to queen the pawn, threatening to go Rook G2, and now white has to find exactly the right defense if he wants to survive. Technically, there are two moves that hold, but the one that is the more direct, let's say, is to go queen b4, which has the idea that h2 is not just queening, because queen d6 and danger levels with the fork. Black might try to anticipate, but, you know, white's queen is running. And yeah, you can put the king on g4, and I mean, who is playing for a win here? Is it white or is it black? Honestly, I don't know, but the computer is saying that if you find queen to d6 and you cover this pawn, you know, you also kind of cut the king off from supporting the pawn, and, you know, if rook g2, king f1, well, we can say that probably white has a fortress, yeah? Like, if you go king f3, you take the pawn with check and this sort of thing, so, yeah, somehow it just ends up being some 0-0-0 draw, where the black pawns on the king side are fast enough that it makes up for white being a queen up. Absolutely incredible. But instead of this, white, I mean, king d3 is also technically drawing for kind of similar reasons, but king f3, unfortunately, is a decisive mistake. And actually, black missed the way in which it is a decisive mistake, which is in itself very instructive. Probably both players are quite low on time, yeah? But, well, if you do manage to find this, put it in the comments below. I want to see, this is move 55, by the way. I want to see if you can get it right and improve on the play of both of these players with black to play. Alright, so if you're tactically sharp, you will have seen, after perhaps some thought, that f4 is just complete murder. The point being that, you know, we're threatening to go rook g3, king move somewhere, and rook g2, and we win the queen, yeah? But if you play ef4, the problem is g4 check comes. And this is the key, they don't have the f4 square anymore for the king to run away. So after king e3, rook g3, we go rook g2, and we win the queen, and it's game over, yeah? And if you try to move the queen away, let's say you play, I don't know, queen b4 or something, trying to get out of it, and try to get some check, then here again, like, this would be a perpetual, but then computer comes up with this crazy move, king to g7, double exclamation mark. And the point is that we're queening our pawn, and somehow they just are not in a position to stop this pawn. Just absolutely insane. They can't bring the queen back to the second rank because rook g3, rook g2. We saw that already. But if queen e2, black just goes h2, and somehow white just runs out of checks. Like, queen e5, we do a little triangulation, king to h7. Queen f5 is the only check that makes sense. And now king to g8. A little triangulation with the king, getting that white queen out of position, so that after queen c8, king g7, white doesn't have any more checks. Black is queening with check, and white can resign. It would be absolutely incredible if black had found this, but he didn't find it. He decided to play it slowly with king h5, and that could have given white the chance to save the game. If white finds a move like, let's say, rook to queen to f2, and keeps that queen on e1, just saying that, okay, I'm covering this promotion square, and, you know, if you go, let's say, g4, and you try to play super direct, like h2, threatening rook g1, you know, white just blocks with queen h1. This is the key difference, where it's like, you're keeping that queen in prison. You know, you've got some fun ideas like rook f2, a very nice little trick to show you rook to f3, then, you know, king h2, rook h3, of course, loses the queen, and, you know, you get this position where basically you've got the queen tied up, blocking the pawn, but at the same time, it's like white is kind of holding, like he's just sitting on this position with the king, and somehow, you know, it just ends up being a draw, because the rook queen is also tying up the rook to defending the pawn, yeah, and you can't sort of win just with the king by itself, yes or yes. So, instead though, white goes queen h2, he kind of, you know, errs back, as it were. And now after g4, king to f4, now this is a winning position for black. Okay, the move rook f1 is, and going king h4 is technically faster. Kind of the point is that king g3, rook g3 is a pretty funny smothered mate as well. So, you know, just to show you the amazing way in which black wins this. But, okay, rook g2, to be fair, is still winning. We can't really fault black for this move. Queen h1. Black goes king h4. Again, it's much better to go rook f2 and get h2 first, but this is still technically winning. Because if white were to take that pawn, let's say, we go g3, and it's just a very amazing point that white just can't get his queen in position to check the king. Like, if we teleport the queen to g4, it's checkmate, but the problem is you just don't get the time. Like, queen d1, for example, black has rook f2 check to stop queen g4 mate, and when the king moves, you just You just queen your pawn and there's just nothing white can do. It's just completely insane. By the way, if queen e1, you just go king g3 and h2 g1. Like, how are you stopping this as white? The answer is you aren't. You lose. So, white goes queen at f1. And now g3. Everything else is losing, but this threatens rook f2 check. So, the king goes e5 to get out of it, but rook f2, like, look at this. This beats the royal flush. Remember the Rogers quote? And you can beat IM's a queen down as well. Queen to c1. So if they go queen to e1, trying to hold back g2, white's just going to play h2, and it's kind of slow looking, but there's actually nothing white can really do to stop this plan of king g2 and h1 equals queen. Because if you think about it, white would want to have the queen on square like this for perpetuals, right? But the white king is now in the way. That's the problem here. So white goes queen c1, and the game ended with g2. White goes e4, like hoping for some queen h6 miracle, but turns out the threat is not real. A lot of moves are winning for black, but Niemann goes the direct way, rook f1, and then, as we often see in queen endings, actually uses his own pawns, and to some degree maybe the opponent's pawns as well, as a shield from the checks, so that after king h2, we are threatening the queen, but white does not have any sensible check. You know, queen cannot jump over and take its own pieces in a sense, but after queen d2, king h1, queen e3, and this is the final trick, hoping that black, lost his concentration and, plays g1 equals queen and, lets white take the rook. Which, funny enough, is actually, still winning anyway, because you've got queen h2 with a check. So the idea of the perpetual doesn't even actually work. But okay, in the game, black just goes h2 to just make sure he queens the pawn next move without any hitches. And so, GM Hans resigned, and Niemann got maybe the most incredible swindle. Maybe of the whole, even 21st century so far, quite frankly. Just absolutely incredible game. I'm still totally mind blown by it. And what about you? Do you think this is the best swindle of all time? Let me know in the comments below if you think it is, or if you think there's a better swindle, tell me that as well. Hope that you guys really enjoyed this video. I know I had immense pleasure, talking about this game and sharing it with you. So I'll see you in the next video. By the way, if you are a chess expert, rate over 2,000, check out the link to DM me to get in touch about getting the chess master in the next 12 months. That's all from now. Catch you guys later.